something sacred inside them. The human spirit craves freedom, but it also craves connection. When you stop suffocating the first, the second can finally breathe. And then something beautiful happens. They start to want to lead. The avoidant, once afraid of being consumed, starts reaching out. They start planning, texting first, asking how you are, showing up in ways you once dreamed of. Not because you finally found the right words, but because your silence became more powerful than your chase. Energy precedes action. The moment you shifted from need to certainty, the dynamic changed. Because leadership, even in love, comes from energy, not effort. And when your energy is stable, strong, and loving without demand, it becomes magnetic. They begin to trust the emotional ground beneath them. They begin to realize you're not here to take something from them. You're here to stand beside them. And that trust is what awakens the leader within them. You must understand this. Avoidance is not absence of love. It's the absence of safety. You don't fix that by explaining. You fix it by embodying safety, by being a living example of emotional regulation, respect, and compassion. When love stops being a battlefield, the avoidant can finally come home. When connection stops being pressure, it becomes peace. And peace is what makes them lead. So stop asking, when will they change? Start asking, what energy am I putting into this bond? Because your energy is the invitation. Your calm is the call. The moment you stop chasing the avoidant is the moment they start chasing peace. And if you become peace, they'll chase you. They'll initiate. They'll take the lead. Not because you forced them to but because you became the kind of love that doesn't demand, it inspires. That's when everything changes. When an avoidant finally feels safe, something extraordinary happens inside them. The walls they've built for years begin to loosen. Safety doesn't mean coddling them or tiptoeing around their emotions. It means creating a space where their nervous system can finally breathe. For most avoidants, love has always felt like danger. Connection felt like a trap. Every time they got close to someone, their body screamed, "You're going to lose yourself again." So they learned to pull away, to guard their peace by shutting down, by taking control through distance. What they never learned was that real safety doesn't come from isolation. It comes from presence without pressure. When someone meets them with emotional calm instead of emotional chaos, their system begins to rewire itself. They start to feel something they didn't even know they were missing, a sense of stability within connection. It's not the loud promises or grand gestures that break through their armor. It's your consistency, your tone, your energy. When you show up without trying to rescue or fix them, you're showing them something radically different. You're saying, you don't have to be anyone else here. You don't have to hide. That's what awakens leadership inside them. Because at their core, avoidants are not weak. They are deeply self-sufficient, resilient, and strong-willed people who had to learn independence too early. But that same strength becomes their prison when they associate love with loss of control. The moment they sense that they can remain independent and connected at the same time, their natural leadership instinct rises again. They don't want to run anymore. They want to create. They want to lead from a place of choice rather than fear. Safety awakens that power. It tells their subconscious, you're no longer in danger. You can put your sword down. And when that happens, they begin to step forward. They start making small moves, a text, a gesture, an effort to connect. To someone on the outside, it might seem minor, but to them, it's monumental. It's the first sign that they feel secure enough to risk being seen. People often mistake silence for disinterest, but for the avoidant, silence is usually self-protection. When they finally initiate, it's not because they were pushed hard enough. It's because something in their environment became still enough for their courage to surface. You can't rush this process. You can't demand it. It's the energy of patience and grounded presence that invites it. Safety isn't about never triggering them. It's about becoming a space where even triggers can be navigated without fear of rejection. When you hold space for their discomfort without taking it personally, you show them that connection doesn't have to mean chaos. That's when they start to relax. And when they relax, they lead. It's the law of human energy. When fear goes down, responsibility goes up. You'll notice this shift in subtle ways. They start asking questions about you. They make decisions, plan things, take initiative. Why? Because safety activates ownership. When someone feels safe enough to be themselves, they begin to take ownership of their presence in your life. They don't wait to be told what to do. They want to contribute. They want to show up. This is what most people miss. The avoidant doesn't need more love thrown at them. They need less pressure. They need to experience love as freedom. When love becomes synonymous with choice, they naturally move toward it. Because deep down, they've always wanted to lead. They've just been afraid that leadership in love would mean losing themselves. When you provide emotional safety, they realize they can lead and still stay true to who they are. And that's the paradox of awakening and avoidance initiative. It happens not through demand, but through allowance. You create the conditions of safety, and they step into the role they were always meant to play. When they feel safe, they stop protecting and start participating. And in that moment, leadership isn't something you ask for. It's something they finally offer freely. Space is not distance, it's not coldness, it's not punishment, it's the sacred ground where desire is born again. For the avoidant, constant closeness can feel like suffocation, even when love is real. Their nervous system is wired to equate intimacy with overwhelm, connection with loss of autonomy. So when you back off, not from anger but from wisdom, you create the space that allows their natural desire to rise to the surface. It's not the absence of love that draws them closer. It's the absence of pressure. Many people misunderstand space as rejection, but true space is respect. It says, I trust your timing. I don't need to control your pace. I know who I am, and I know what I bring. This energy of calm assurance does something profound. It disarms their defenses. When they sense that you're not trying to manage them, they no longer need to resist you. Avoidants are hypersensitive to emotional intrusion. They've lived most of their lives protecting their sense of independence. So when someone offers them space that feels honoring rather than punishing, their instinct shifts from retreat to curiosity. They begin to wonder, why isn't this person trying to fix me? Why do I feel calmer around them? And that curiosity becomes the seed of pursuit. Space is what allows the heart to breathe again. When you're constantly in their orbit, texting, explaining, checking in, overgiving, you leave them no room to miss you, no room to reflect, no room to feel their own pull. The paradox of connection is that desire thrives in mystery, not management. When you pull your energy back, when you stop chasing validation from their reaction, you stop feeding their fear. And suddenly, they start to feel something they haven't felt in a long time, the urge to move toward you on their own. This is not a game. It's not manipulation. It's alignment. You're aligning with a universal truth. What is freely given loses its value when it's demanded. When love is offered with no expectation, it becomes magnetic. And when someone who fears closeness senses that freedom, their soul relaxes. They realize they can reach out and still remain themselves. That's when initiation begins. That's when they start to lead, because they're no longer defending themselves against being controlled. Space is not about waiting passively. It's about standing in your power actively. You don't withdraw in silence. You return to yourself. You recenter your energy. You reconnect with your own purpose, your own joy, your own emotional rhythm. You let your absence speak in a way that no words can. And as your energy rebalances, they feel it. They can sense when the pressure has been released. The human heart is sensitive to energy. And when yours shifts from need to peace, they notice. They may not say it, but their body knows. Their spirit recognizes it. That's when the dynamic starts to change. They begin to remember the warmth of your presence, not the weight of your expectations. They start to crave the energy you carry, grounded, loving, free. And they realize something crucial. They miss how they feel when they're around you. That's the moment space transforms into magnetism. It's no longer about absence, it's about gravity. You see, desire cannot be chased into existence. It must awaken on its own. And the soil of that awakening is space, intentional, respectful, and calm space. When you stop fighting for connection, you create the energetic opening for connection to find you. When you stop running after their love, you invite them to walk toward yours. The avoidant doesn't fall for control, they fall for peace. They don't respond to pressure, they respond to permission. When you give them room to breathe, you're saying, you are free here. And the moment they truly feel free, they come closer. They initiate, they take the lead. Not because you forced them to, but because your space became the mirror that showed them what real love feels like, freedom without fear, closeness without captivity. And from that space, everything changes. Everything begins with energy. Before words are spoken, before actions are taken, before decisions are made, energy speaks. People feel your vibration long before they understand your intention. When it comes to avoidant individuals, this truth is magnified. They don't respond to logic, they respond to emotional tone. They sense when someone is coming from fear, from need, from desperation. They can feel when someone is seeking validation rather than connection. And when that energy is present, it activates every alarm in their nervous system. That's why the moment you shift your energy from proving your worth to embodying it, everything changes. When your energy says, I need you to choose me, the avoidant feels pressure. But when your energy says, I am already whole, and your presence is a choice, not a requirement, they feel peace. This is not arrogance, it's alignment. You are no longer chasing their validation because you've reclaimed your own. You're no longer waiting for their approval to feel safe because your safety now comes from your inner foundation. That energetic transformation is what flips the dynamic. When your energy is calm, grounded, and self-assured, it signals something rare. It tells them that they are safe around you because you are safe within yourself. Avoidants are deeply intuitive, even if they don't always appear that way. They feel the emotional frequency of the people around them. When you approach them with anxiety, they sense danger. When you approach them with emotional balance, they sense safety. And when they feel safe, their fear-based reflexes start to dissolve. Suddenly, they're no longer in survival mode, they're in connection mode. The energy shift inside you creates the energetic permission inside them to relax. And when they relax, initiative begins to awaken. You've probably noticed this pattern. The moment you stop trying so hard, they come closer. It's not random. It's the energetic law of equilibrium. When you pull back from neediness, you create space for their natural instinct to move forward. But it's not just about pulling back physically. It's about changing the emotional charge behind your actions. You're no longer reaching out from fear of loss. You're reaching out, if at all, from fullness. And that fullness is magnetic. When you start to radiate certainty, not perform it, but embody it, everything about you changes. Your tone softens, your posture straightens, your presence feels grounded. The avoidant feels it instantly. They can't always explain why, but they start to perceive you differently. You're no longer the person trying to pull them into connection. You're the person whose presence feels like peace, and peace is irresistible to someone who's been living in emotional chaos. Energy doesn't lie. You can say all the right things, but if your energy still carries fear, they'll feel it. You can tell them you're fine, but if your tone is shaky, they'll sense the incongruence. That's why inner work is so powerful. When you shift the energy within, when you heal the part of you that seeks to be chosen, your outer world starts to mirror it. You become magnetic not by chasing, but by being. This is the divine paradox. The less you try to control, the more influence you have. When your energy is rooted in peace and presence, people naturally gravitate toward you, especially those who once felt threatened by closeness. The avoidant feels safe enough to explore because they no longer feel pulled or demanded. They're drawn to your stability. And from that attraction, they begin to take initiative, reaching out, opening up, showing interest. They're not responding to your words. They're responding to your vibration. When your energy shifts from insecurity to certainty, from scarcity to abundance, they mirror that stability. You teach them, without saying a word, what emotional safety feels like, and that's what awakens their leadership. So yes, the energy shift always happens before the action. You don't need to chase change. You need to be the change. The moment your energy moves from proving to being, you stop pulling them with force and start drawing them with gravity. And that's when the avoidant, for the first time, feels something deeper than fear. They feel trust. And from trust, they begin to act, to lead, to love. Respect is one of the most powerful forms of love. It's the language that the avoidant understands when words have lost their meaning. Most people try to persuade an avoidant to open up. They use logic, emotion, reassurance, or pressure. But persuasion triggers the very mechanism that keeps them distant. The more they feel someone trying to convince them, the more they retreat into their independence. Respect, on the other hand, has the opposite effect. When you respect their boundaries instead of trying to break through them, you awaken something sacred inside them, the desire to step forward on their own terms. Avoidants are not running from connection. They are running from loss of control. When they sense that someone is trying to direct their emotions or dictate the pace of intimacy, they interpret it as a threat to their autonomy. They withdraw, not because they don't care, but because control feels like safety to them. Respect dismantles that fear. When you stop trying to persuade them and instead say, through your actions and your energy, I honor your pace, you return control to them. And the moment they feel in control of their own choices, they begin to feel safe enough to choose connection again. Respect is quiet power. It doesn't demand, it doesn't chase, it doesn't manipulate. It stands firm in self-worth and says, I trust you to meet me halfway. This kind of energy doesn't push, it invites. And the avoidant, who has spent years expecting intrusion, suddenly finds themselves drawn toward this energy because it feels unfamiliar yet peaceful. It's not trying to take, it's allowing. And that permission is what disarms them. When you replace persuasion with respect, your entire dynamic shifts. You stop operating from scarcity and start embodying abundance. You no longer seek to control the outcome because you trust the process. You understand that real love can't be forced, it can only be inspired. The avoidant feels this shift deeply. They can sense when your intention is pure, when your patience is rooted in strength, not fear. And that strength becomes the emotional anchor they didn't know they needed. Respect means letting them have space without resentment. It means not taking their distance personally. It means understanding that their retreat is not rejection, but regulation, their way of managing overwhelm. When you can hold that space without punishing them emotionally, you become the first person they associate with safety rather than pressure. That association becomes the foundation for trust, and trust is the soil from which leadership grows. You see, persuasion is a form of control dressed as care. It often comes from a good place, a desire to connect, to repair, to be seen. But to the avoidant, it feels like emotional suffocation. Respect is the opposite. It says, I care enough to let you breathe. That message hits their nervous system differently. It doesn't activate resistance, it awakens responsibility. When someone feels respected, they feel empowered to make their own choices. And when they're empowered, they naturally begin to lead. The beauty of respect is that it mirrors emotional maturity. It tells the avoidant, you're capable of showing up when you're ready. And when someone finally believes they're capable, they rise to meet that belief. That's what shifts them from avoidance to engagement. They don't feel chased, they feel trusted. And trust makes them want to step up. It takes strength to respect someone's process without abandoning your own needs. It requires emotional mastery to love someone without trying to control how they love you back. But that's where transformation happens. When your respect becomes the bridge between their fear and their potential, they begin to realize that connection doesn't have to mean losing freedom. It can mean gaining partnership. So, when you stop persuading and start respecting, you stop speaking to their defenses and start speaking to their soul. You show them that love doesn't demand, it invites. And in that invitation, they finally find the safety to take the lead, not out of fear, but out of choice. Emotional mastery is not about suppressing your feelings. It's about owning them so completely that they no longer control your behavior. When you master your emotions, you stop reacting from pain and start responding from power. And for the avoidant who lives in a constant state of hypervigilance toward emotional intensity, this mastery is magnetic. They are drawn to what feels stable, consistent, and calm because their internal world often feels chaotic. When they sense someone who can remain grounded even in moments of uncertainty, their nervous system begins to settle. They start to trust that being close to you won't mean drowning in someone else's emotions. Avoidance often pull away not because they don't care, but because they can't handle emotional overload. When the person they're with reacts to every silence, every withdrawal, every shift in tone, it confirms their deepest fear, that closeness equals chaos. But when you hold your emotional center steady, When you can feel the storm without becoming it, you show them something they've never seen before. Connection without volatility. That kind of energy is deeply healing to them. It creates a sense of peace that invites curiosity rather than fear. Emotional mastery means you no longer take their distance personally. You no longer translate their withdrawal as rejection. Instead, you see it for what it is. A coping mechanism, not a verdict. You can hold compassion without collapsing. You can love without losing yourself. This balance communicates safety on a level that words can't reach. Because what the avoidant needs most isn't constant reassurance. It's emotional consistency. When your energy remains steady, they start to feel that they don't have to protect themselves from you. Your calm becomes their anchor. Every time they test the connection by pulling away, your stability tells them you're safe. You can come back when you're ready. And that message begins to reprogram their nervous system. They start to associate closeness with safety instead of suffocation. Over time, they realize they don't have to run anymore. They can lead without fear because they're not walking into emotional fire. They're walking toward warmth. Emotional mastery also means recognizing your own triggers and transforming them into self-awareness. When you stop making their behavior mean something about your worth, you reclaim your power. You become unshakable, not because you're indifferent, but because you understand that love built on reactivity is not love. It's survival. And you're done surviving. You're ready to lead from peace. That energy changes the entire dynamic. The avoidant begins to respond differently to you because your emotional tone is different. You're no longer trying to pull them in. You're standing in your own light. You're radiating self-respect and calm assurance. They feel the difference. It's in your voice, in your timing, in your silence. You've stopped making emotional demands and started modeling emotional strength. And because energy is contagious, they begin to mirror that steadiness back to you. It's a divine paradox. When you no longer need them to behave a certain way for you to feel at peace, they finally feel free enough to behave differently. When you stop reacting to their fears, they start to trust your stability. They start to open. They start to take initiative because now your presence feels safe, not suffocating. Emotional mastery is the most profound form of leadership in love. It doesn't mean you stop feeling. It means your feelings stop hijacking your purpose. You become the calm within the chaos, and in that calm, the avoidant finds the courage to lead. They step forward, not out of guilt or pressure, but out of alignment. They're responding to the energetic invitation you've created, a space where love doesn't demand, it welcomes. When you master your emotions, you stop feeding fear and start amplifying trust. And trust is what turns avoidance into initiation. It's what transforms a guarded heart into a guiding one. Because emotional mastery isn't just about controlling yourself. It's about becoming the safe space where another person finally remembers what love without fear feels like. Love without control is one of the most liberating forces in the universe. It's the kind of love that gives rather than grasps, that allows rather than demands. And for the avoidant, the one who equates love with loss of freedom, it is the one experience that can disarm every defense. When love stops trying to manage outcomes, it becomes magnetic. When it no longer insists, come closer, and instead whispers, you, we're free to be who you are. Something inside the avoidant softens. The fear that once drove them to withdraw begins to lose its grip. They start to see that love doesn't have to be a cage. It can be a home. Control comes from fear. Fear of being abandoned, of being unseen, of not being enough. It tries to make love predictable. But love that's controlled stops being love and becomes strategy. You can't inspire someone's soul by managing their choices. You can only awaken it by giving them space to choose freely. When an avoidant feels that they're being loved not as a project but as a person, their resistance fades. They begin to step forward on their own, not because they've been persuaded, but because they've been respected. Love without control says, I'm here, but I don't need to own you to feel secure. That kind of love feels like oxygen to the avoidant heart. They've spent much of their life associating closeness with suffocation. So, when they encounter someone who can love deeply without smothering, they begin to feel something they haven't felt before. safety within connection. And once safety is established, initiative awakens naturally. They start to lead because they no longer feel the need to run. This doesn't mean detachment. It's not about withholding love or pretending not to care. It's about loving with open hands, staying connected, while allowing the other person full freedom of movement. It's the kind of energy that says, you're not obligated to stay, you're invited to. That subtle difference changes everything. Obligation breeds avoidance. Invitation breeds desire. When you give someone the emotional freedom to choose you, their heart moves toward you because it wants to, not because it has to. Avoidants are sensitive to control because their earliest experiences with love often came with conditions. Maybe love was inconsistent. Maybe it came with expectations. Maybe it felt like a trade rather than a gift. So, when someone comes into their life and embodies unconditional presence, love that gives without needing to control, it confuses them at first, but slowly it heals them. They start to realize that love can coexist with autonomy, that they can be in connection without losing their individuality. And in that realization, they begin to take initiative. They begin to show up not as protectors of their freedom, but as participants in the relationship. The irony is that when you stop trying to control love, you gain more influence. When you release your grip, the bond strengthens because it's built on trust, not fear. The avoidant senses your freedom and starts to mirror it. They begin to lead not out of obligation, but out of inspiration. They start to give because they feel safe to give. They start to communicate because they no longer fear being cornered. Love without control is divine because it mirrors how the universe loves, freely, expansively, without demand. It trusts timing. It trusts growth. It allows others to find their way without trying to bend their path. When you embody this kind of love, you stop trying to extract proof of worthiness from someone else and instead become the living proof of it yourself. And that energy changes the entire dynamic. The avoidant begins to feel something sacred, freedom within closeness. They realize they're not being loved for what they provide or how they behave, but for who they are. And that realization inspires responsibility. They no longer need to protect their autonomy. They start to use it. They begin to lead because love no longer feels like captivity. It feels like choice. When love is free, it transforms both people. One learns to let go, the other learns to step up. And in that balance, the relationship becomes what it was always meant to be. Two whole beings, walking side by side, choosing each other again and again, not from fear, but from freedom. Every relationship is a mirror, not of who the other person is, but of who you are becoming through them. The avoidant, the one who pulls away, the one who seems distant, they are not your enemy, they are your teacher. They show you where your attachment still needs to evolve, where your love is still mixed with fear, and where your heart still clings to control instead of trust. The truth is, the moment you stop trying to fix them, they start to heal. The moment you stop demanding love, love begins to flow. When you create safety instead of pressure, they begin to lead. When you give space instead of chasing, they begin to desire. When you shift your energy from fear to certainty, they begin to open. When you respect instead of persuade, they begin to trust. When you master your emotions, they begin to feel safe in yours. And when you love without control, they begin to choose you from freedom, not fear. That's the power of transformation, not through force, but through alignment. Every human heart, even the most guarded, responds to truth. You can't unlock it with pressure, but you can invite it with presence. You can't demand leadership from someone who's still fighting their own fears, but you can awaken it by being the calm their heart has been searching for. The moment they sense you no longer need them to fill your emptiness, they start to feel safe enough to bring their fullness. So, if you're waiting for an avoidant to initiate, don't focus on what they're not doing. Focus on who you are becoming. Become the space that feels like peace. Become the energy that says you are free here. Become the love that needs no control to be powerful. Because that's the kind of love that shifts energy, transforms people, and heals the patterns that words never could. Remember, leadership in love doesn't start with them, it starts with you. When you rise in energy, they rise in response. When you stop proving, they start moving. And when you love from wholeness instead of fear, you stop chasing validation and start creating transformation. You were never meant to beg for love. You were meant to embody it. You were never meant to chase someone's attention. You were meant to awaken their soul through your presence. The one who feels safe in your light will always find their way back.